Okay, so condition monitoring observer reports, CMOR reports, help us see more drought. The map you're seeing on the left is what the Arizona map of CMOR reports looks like right now, or I should say the CMOR map zoomed into Arizona. Every dot on that map is there because somebody took the time to submit a report. And as Brian has, I think, already said and says frequently, just because even if you had a huge cluster of dots on the map, it doesn't mean it's not by itself going to color in the drought monitor map. What it does do, whether it's 1 dot or 100 dots reports, is it will send the drought monitor authors to look at data more closely, to find some physical data that does or doesn't corroborate the story that we're hearing from the on the ground observers. So there's a CMOR landing page that's got quite a bit of information on it. You can click to bring up the submit a report form. If you come here on a mobile and you click submit report by app, it will prompt you to download the field app. It works pretty slick on mobile. There's the map of 2021 reports, an archive of all the reports received since 2018, a fact sheet that tells you more about the project, a video that's got some, it's very how to get started with the mobile app and how to submit a report if you wanted to share that with any of the people who you're trying to get to report more. And then there's also some social media resources. If, for example, a weather forecast office saw that you're going into drought and wanted to say to people, hey, what are you seeing out there? Send us a CMOR report. There's some pre-made resources to be used for that. So first, I'll give you a quick rundown of what the form looks like, just so you get a feel for it. And then I'll talk to you a little bit more, share a little bit more information about how different states have used this type of reporting. So location obviously is really important. There are 3 different ways. This is a screenshot from my mobile. 3 different ways that you can fill in a location. One is just give it a general location. People may not want to share their specific address, their specific property. So the closest city or county is okay. If you have location enabled on your mobile device and you touch the compass, sometimes it really nails it, like down to the, your backyard. That may or may not be what people desire. I will say if you're doing this from a desktop and you've got VPN on, like I sit in Nebraska and sometimes it shows me coming from Dallas. So VPN completely messes with it. So it does and doesn't work sometimes. You can also position the marker on the map. There's a location quality control element that, sometimes a point will turn up in the middle of the ocean somewhere. Someone has bumped their location widget after they selected a location or they weren't sure how they used it. This will not accurately position the marker on the map, but it does help us determine whether we need to reposition it for you. And if we possibly can, we do put it in the right county. The date set to the default day, or today is the default date. Then we've got that same dry to wet scale that CocoRa's and the CISA folks in North and South Carolina put together. That people seem to like it. I have the impression it enhances participation. Then we have questions related to people's experience. And part of this is how often have you experienced drought of this severity? And part of it is how long have you been there? What is your experience with that place? And these experience questions help put it in drought monitor percentile context. So exceptional drought is 0 to 2% of the time, and that would be 1 in 50 years. So right now we're not doing a lot with this data, but we're collecting it in hopes that we will eventually have enough to do something interesting with it. Then new for next year, for the 2022 version of the survey, we will be asking people to report on normal or wet conditions. We do encourage people to report, say, monthly or more frequently, but we don't really give them a lot of non-drought observations to make. So in this case, we've added a block of questions for normal or wet conditions. Hopefully that will encourage more regular observations. And then there are several drought impact checklists developed with people in different states and different sectors as to what might be interesting to ask about. And I'll just pause here for a moment and say that part of what's really nice about this technology, the It's Esri based. It's Survey 123 is what we're using to collect the data, and then ArcGIS Online to display the data. We're using this off-the-shelf technology. It's not hard-coded. We are, in a sense, the end user, so we can change things really easily. So there's this kind of iterative process of what information do people on the ground want to contribute? What information do people at the Drought Monitoring Technical Committee need, or another state agency? What do you need, and what do Drought Monitor authors need? So it's kind of iterative to figure out what works between different groups in different places. And so each of these sectors may be more or less relevant for different places. So when you click on one of these triangles, it expands to a list of potential impacts, in this case for crop production. And at the bottom, there's always other that opens up a free text field, and you can tell us what you're seeing. And then there's the option to upload up to 5 photos. And as Brian mentioned, it's really good if we have some basis of comparison. So either tell us why we're seeing, what should this look like? If you're saying this is a drought photo, what should it look like in a normal year? Or better yet, even upload a photo at the same time from a normal or wet year to compare and contrast. Of course, doing that regularly over time is another good way to build a basis for comparison. Then we're continuing to evolve how we ask people for identity. Some people want to use their real names, other people don't. So we're asking people to identify themselves by role, including extension or farm service agency, farmer or livestock producer, water supplier, homeowner, natural water resources professional, on down to outdoor enthusiast, climate professional. Then we ask them in 2022, we're going to start asking them for a display name. That could be their real name. It could be Happy Rancher 42. Hopefully that will be a basis for starting to associate reports from the same place with one person. Right now, if there were a couple of reports that just say came from Phoenix, we would have no way of knowing whether, or we can tell on the inside, but the public view can't tell whether or not it's from the same person. So this would begin to be a way to associate it with a specific individual, either by name or by sort of username or handle. We also do have an option for our state partners to see kind of an insider view of things that does provide full data, because people have said we want to know who is submitting information. So then you go, you do all that, you hit submit, then you go find your dot on the map. In this case, this was submitted back in April from someone in Tucson, and they have this photo of their drought tolerant plants not doing very well in dry conditions. So that's kind of what the process looks like and how it puts a dot on the map. So in terms of how this is structured, a key thing that I want to emphasize is that we are not out there. I mean, this is on the web. Some people just spontaneously find it and submit a report. The vast majority of people don't submit a report unless they are asked to from somebody that they trust and believe in, like the Missouri Cattlemen's Association or the Georgia Cattlemen's Association or the Missouri Department of Natural Resources or North Dakota Extension agents. So we don't at the Drought Center want to get out ahead of what you at the state can use. So we don't want a state to be gathering a lot of these reports, or we don't want producers from a state to be submitting a lot of these reports that then the state's monitoring technical committee or whoever's doing that either doesn't know about or can't use. So we're trying to work with people in each location about how you would like to use this infrastructure that is established. And I'll give you some more examples as we go. But basically, we have Drought Monitor authors, rightly or wrongly, kind of at the top of this pyramid. They are the sort of the national coordinating final word on things, working within each state. Then there's typically either a state climatologist or a drought assessment team, such as the Monitoring Technical Committee in Arizona. And there are state producer organizations, also state water and resource agencies that may be allocating drought relief or making drought relief decisions. And so using these reports for their own purposes. So any of these folks from a state may reach out to the different observer types within that state, the different individuals across the state, and say, would you please submit observations for this specific purpose? And then they go, so these circles are the various individuals, they go into the CMOR system using the Survey 123 form onto the ArcGIS online map, which is pretty much an instantaneous process. They appear right away. So it's very efficient. You can gather information from a lot of people in a short time. And then that is used by state climatologists, state assessment teams, in some cases in making recommendations to Drought Monitor authors. Sometimes Drought Monitor authors access that directly, or our team at the Drought Center we have a summary every Monday that goes out of what's come through on CMOR, at least we did during the growing season. So that's a little bit of how the system works. And now I'll give you some examples of how some different states have used it. In Missouri in 2018, they really went to town. They were very successful. The state climatologist there, Pat Gannan, has been in place for a long time. And even before we had this kind of slick technology for collecting drought impacts, he was urging people to submit drought impact reports. So he's been doing this for a long time. And then in 2018, we had this Survey 123 technology, and Missouri had a really terrible constellation of weather events, a late freeze and then some extreme heat, and it was terrible growing conditions even before drought started to emerge. So it was a lot of stuff going on. And so farmers and ranchers there were having a really tough time. And so the state led what they called kind of a media blitz to get people to submit reports. And they framed it very much in context of the Drought Monitor, help the monitor authors get it right, help them see where drought is occurring. Oh, and by the way, if we get from D2 to D3, there may be an additional, livestock forage program level of assistance kicking in. There was, there's initially some skepticism about this volume of reports, because there is this kind of big step from D2 to D3 in terms of the livestock forage disaster program. And we did sort of a statistical analysis and determined that, yep, there is definitely a D2 effect. It appears, you can't say for sure why, but it does appear that a financial incentive did lead more people to report on drought. But what's really important to point out is that that does not make the information that they provided wrong. It just means that it was worth their time to submit that information. So trying to balance the motivation and the credibility question is kind of a big one right now, kind of a big ongoing question. And what state officials there said is they used that information to, their approach was trust but verify. We'll assume that people are acting with positive intent, but before we definitely draw a line on the map, we're going to verify it another way. But this way they knew where to look for drought impacts. And we did a little bit of survey work and determined that hearing from the Missouri Cattlemen's Association was important for some people in deciding to submit a report. So those kind of insider networks are really pretty important. In Georgia in 2019, it was, they also, if this were a zoomed out map, you'd see kind of a concentration of reports in the Southeast. The state climatologist in Georgia and some of the state extension folks that were fielding a lot of calls from ag producers especially in late in the growing season, like October, they had this kind of fast, it was kind of a flash drought, and it didn't last very long, fortunately, but it was pretty sudden and intense. And they were getting lots of calls from agricultural producers, and they really directed people to use the CMOR system. Go here, submit your report, and then that way everything appears very quickly on a map. It's a very efficient way to gather and display a lot of information. And they generally were appreciated that this gave people a voice in the process. That was some of the feedback that we got from Georgia, was that this was a valuable tool, almost an outlet in some cases for collecting information from people who were experiencing crisis. And in this past year, North Dakota reached out to its extension agents and asked them to submit weekly reports. So, North Dakota is not very densely populated, and a lot of those reports are on top of each other, but probably, well, definitely more than half of the reports that we got in 2021 were from North Dakota, from this very well organized extension network. made a presentation to them early in the year, early in the growing season, and kind of walked them through the how-to of getting set up on a mobile app. And they chose to mainly publicize this opportunity within the extension network for purposes of credibility, so that they would know who was reporting and that they could trust those reports. And that was pretty successful in terms of getting a lot of reports. It was kind of a professional agreement to work together to do that. And then Oregon Forestry had helped us a couple of years ago develop a block of forestry questions. At that point, we didn't have any forestry questions on the survey. So they had come up with this separate survey that just was kind of branded to Oregon Forestry. And then when they had drought conditions emerge this year, they unearthed that and started using it. And fortunately, someone tipped us off that they were using it, and we connected it up to the map so that could appear too. And what we heard from them, they actually collected data in a lot of ways. They were pretty innovative, including some citizen science surveys that were quite detailed, tree diameter and all that. But what they found from the CMOR survey was it was really good for a general audience asking these general questions because it was pretty easy to use. And then they knew where to go look, sort of to send a team for more professional assessment. So those are some of the different ways that states have made use of the CMOR system. We're also working with some states. I mean, Arizona, it's not too late to get in on this. We've figured out how we can share our survey with state partners who have Esri capability. So you can have a version of the survey that says, report Arizona drought impacts. And then you can block out as many of those sectors as you don't want, like spawning fish might not be relevant in Arizona, or community hydropower. People are really, nobody will tell me for sure in most places that no, that's not relevant. And because you never know what may be relevant, but honestly, people may want to focus more on certain sectors. So there's a way that you can do that. You can sort of whittle it down for your purposes, and it will still flow back to the main survey and appear on the main map. I can tell you more about that if you're interested. Then, of course, we want to work with people in different places to expand the on-the-ground networks, to recruit and train observers. It'd be really nice to, COCORAS is still kind of the big brother in all this. It'd be really cool if we had the same amount of training and outreach resources that they did. And I'm just saying that would be a next new thing to add, to be able to do the kind of education and training to really cultivate ongoing observers. And then develop recognized credibility ratings based on reports submitted over time. So again, getting people to submit monthly, probably with regular training to do that, and ways to be a known user or recognize certain contributions or things like that. So that's CMOR. The Visual Drought Atlas is a related tool. Again, this is more about developing a collection of reference photos over time, so that when people submit, say, oh, here's a photo, here's how dry it is in my place, we have some basis of comparison in a normal or a wet year to see whether or not it's looking dry. And this was started by COCORAS and SCIP, and probably still some of the best contributors to this are those well-trained COCORAS volunteers. We ask people to submit landscape photos in the four cardinal, facing in the four cardinal directions as well as straight down. And it's okay to show animals or landmarks, but preferably no people. And we have added, since we've done this in using the Survey 123 collection form and ArcGIS Online, we've added U.S. drought monitor status as the first tab, and then landscape status. That's the one question that Visual Drought Atlas observers always answer. Is this a water body? Is this farmland? So we ask them what type of land they're showing. And then we also have added that 7-point dry to wet scale, so we can also map by that. And this is what the land use question looks like. It's the only question, other than how dry or wet is it and the location and the date. That's the only question that the Visual Drought Atlas observers fill in. They don't have all of the impacts checklist. So ongoing, the Drought Center and CoCoRaHS continue to work together to prompt people to submit landscape photos on the 4 main holidays. And the Drought Center is exploring additional sources of photos for the Visual Drought Atlas, including USDA archives and PhenoCam. To quickly compare and contrast some of the different citizen science and crowdsourcing opportunities that we've talked about today, CoCoRaHS is about daily precipitation observations with the standardized 4-inch rain gauge. And then there's the optional condition monitoring reports related to drought. And as I said, you get lots of good community building and educational messaging from the CoCoRaHS organization. And they have a customized browser form or a mobile app that you use for that. In the condition monitoring observer reports at the Drought Center, we ask you same thing to report on dry or wet conditions. And there's kind of an emphasis on checking off drought impacts. You can upload photos. I don't believe CoCoRaHS offers that yet. And ours is based on Esri's Survey 123, which works on a browser or a mobile app. The Visual Drought Atlas is the same technology as CMOR, but we're not asking people about drought impacts. We do ask them for the wet to dry evaluation, but it's mostly upload landscape photos 4 times a year and tell us how dry or wet you think it is. And then tweets, as we said earlier, you can, if you put your city and state or your county and state in the user location field and use a drought hashtag, it should show up on the weekly drought tweet map. So that is the overview of CMOR and Visual Drought Atlas.